Kim the opportunity to introduce themselves to our audience. If we could start with you, Kate. Could you tell us how you ended up in Eau Claire and what inspired you to enter local politics?
Yeah, hello everyone, and thanks David, and to the ACLU. I am Kate Beaton. I serve on the Eau Claire City Council, and I also am the Western organizer for Wisconsin conservation voters in my day job. So I am an advocate for our environment and the people who rely on it, as well as an advocate for voter rights in that position. I came to Eau Claire actually 10 years ago this month. I arrived in Eau Claire as a student at UW Eau Claire, graduated from Eau Claire, and began working on issues of food insecurity and food justice and sustainable food systems. And that led me to interact with our city government and got asked enough to run for city council, which is, typical of young people and women who need to be asked over and over before they say yes to run for office. I finally ran for office in 2014 and have been serving on the Eau Claire City Council since then. I ran for office in 2016.
All right, thank you, Kate. And Kim, could you tell us how long you've been in Eau Claire and what made you decide to get involved in county level politics?
Yeah, sure. Hi, so I'm Kim Kronk, and I actually came to school here as a teenager. I came to the university here to study and had several different majors. I was interested in art, and then actually decided to move away. I moved to the southwestern part of the state. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico or surrounding areas for about 7 years, and ended up coming back, rejoining the university, and was studying ultimately political science, and had no thoughts or intentions of being involved with local government at all. However, through just sort of the course of a turn of events and really becoming engaged, and I think more engaged in raising children in the community, I too was asked, the person who was in my seat previously had resigned. So my course in was actually having to apply. It was suggested that I applied for the position. I was appointed after an interview, and then have been elected for the past 2 sessions. So that appointment started in 2016, and I have been a county board supervisor for District 28 ever since. And also, as you know, serving on committees, I serve on the Board of Human Services. I've served on the board of the Aging and Disability Resource Center, and most recently, after this election, was elected as the chair. And also have done some various projects. I was involved in a 6-month jail population study, and serving in a project, a peer learning network project through the National Counties Association right now, looking at ways that we can reduce folks with mental health needs and alcohol and drug issues within our jail, as well as reducing, I prefer the word eliminating, racial and ethnic disparities within our jail population. And also I am involved and was elected to serve on the Police and Fire Commission within the last couple of months. So getting my feet wet there too. And I have a real passion for not criminal justice reform, but really criminal legal. We just need a complete dismantling and overhaul of our system. And I think there's a ton of opportunities and ways that we can be really creative. So just kind of trying to figure out ways that I can become more involved within the community. And that is, I guess, what urged me or keeps me motivated to continue to lead and to serve. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. All right. Before we begin, Kim is going to lead this discussion out with a poem by Jeff Young. I'll let Kim explain a little bit about Mr. Young. This poem is meant to frame this discussion. We're speaking on politics, elections, and government, but I want everyone to keep at the forefront of their mind how these systems play out for individuals who do not have equal representation at the city, county, state, and national levels, and how the lack of representation perpetuates discrimination in our legislative, executive and judicial branches of government. And then Kim, I'm going to pull the picture up, and then once the picture's up, you can go ahead and start reading the poem by Jeff Young.
Yeah, so thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of set the tone with reading a poem. And although there was an audio clip, I think it's really important to amplify the voices, not just the images too, but the voices of artists. And unfortunately, this particular audio clip just wasn't working well with this platform. So you're going to have to do with Jeff's picture and my voice reading some powerful artwork and some powerful poetry. So this is called Marginalized by Jeff Young. Some things are never kept indoors. They stay forever in the rain. Partially collapsed kiddie pools, quietly joyless in backyards, buried behind tangled October grass, filled with rain, collecting withered leaves, gnats. Drowned casualties towed away in the undercurrent, like a penitent aging in the penitentiary, beleaguered by pitter-patter pelting his solitary soul, chasmed pavement that crumbles into what? Scarecrows sulk in neglected fields, 8 burgundy autumns old, now eager friends of thieving crows. Conquerors play king of the hill on tattered tweed shoulders. Gracious mocking caws coalesce with the silhouetted scent of mulch and decay. Some things are never kept indoors. They stay forever in the rain. Some winds howl, batter barkless willows, tatter inner beauty, scattered budding leaflings to winter horizons, like the battered wife who stays because children need a father. Lightning strikes twice, 3, 4, and 5 times, her soul on fire once. Now blue-gray swirl rise from rain-dampened ashes. Her tears drown her children, rain-drenched, dressed in white linen, splattered with mud as Lambos and phantoms zoom by. The children's thumbs out, hoping to be saved. Some things are never kept indoors. They stay forever in the rain. Raindrops swirl along grasping branches where bird feeders sway brimmed with seed, pilfered by broom-bristled squirrels and balloon-cheeked rodents. The cardinal sings her protest. Perched on the roof of a collapsing shack, the drizzle dampens her decor. Like the teenage girl whose knees tingle from the wet concrete in an alley as she smudges lipstick on the millionaire from Craigslist. Black raindrops surf the curve of her cheekbone. Discarded soggy teddy bears, legless, one eye, and shredded ears. Tender fluff exposed, like homeless children born in poverty. Might get a bologna bag lunch, but no education, no home, no love. Sombreros, hijabs, and afros, rainbow flags and shackles, trafficked and food stamped. Will someone please take us in? Refugees seeking temporary reprieve with a buckled umbrella frayed and wind-torn. Is there room for 2? Some things are never kept indoors. They stay forever in the rain. And I want to add that aside from thanking Jeff for sending his artwork and giving permission for it to be shared today, I also want to thank Emily Baxter and her project of We Are All Criminals, and the Scene Project, which is part of the Minnesota Prison Writers Project, better known as the Minnesota Prison Writers Project. And you have Jeff's picture up, David, and I'm not able to, I think because he's still up, I'm not able to access what else I wanted to read briefly from him, but I will say that Jeff has had an ongoing article in the past in the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, as well as the associate editor of the Prison Mirror. And I just wanted to read briefly that he says, art changes lives because it forces us, whoops, oh, 1 second. Art changes lives because it forces us to evaluate themselves. It forces one to evaluate themselves, get to know themselves better. It's a personal journey, but one that can transpire in the public eye. And when it happens, it really allows people to have a vicarious experience with the artist and his or her life experiences. It can become a spiritual communal experience, two beings finding self in each other. That continued connection to community is important in my sense of purpose in life. Art is an extremely important medium as a bridge between prison and the community. It allows people to see the truth of each other's humanity and the irreducible value resident in all souls despite past or present poor decisions or thinking. And so I just wanted to share that and set the tone, hopefully, for our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Jeff Young, for that piece. One portion that I think that can lead us into this first question that both elected officials will be responding to is that battered women that stay because their sons need a father, or their children need a father. I think that it's important to recognize that we have a lot of systems that were put in place early on in the formation of this country, and they've been rolling on their own. You know, they're reinforced through, you know, perceptions, biases, things of that nature. You know, a number of laws that contribute to discrimination, but then each of our lives on the individual level play out the way that they do, because ultimately we have certain necessities for survival. So like the battered woman who stays because her kids need a father, that's a situation that the system is reinforcing. And to people on the outside that aren't in the same dilemma, it may look like the person is acting irrational, but I believe that all people act rationally based on what they need for survival. So moving into kind of the breakdown of our government here in Eau Claire County in the city of Eau Claire, I'd like to first start with Kate. Kate is a city council person. I would like you, Kate, to just explain what your roles and responsibilities are on the city council of Eau Claire.
Yeah, so obviously as an elected official, it's my job to listen to people, to listen to the constituents of Eau Claire and what they need in order to thrive in our city. Our city government is responsible for, you know, at the surface level, what you might think is some mundane things like infrastructure, how we build our roads and buildings, but when you really dig into it, these are the things that so intimately impact people's lives. They're, you know, our roads and our transportation system is what determines whether somebody has, you know, accessible transportation to get to their job or to the doctor or to the grocery store. Do we have a transit system with buses? Do we have bike lanes and lots of different options for people, no matter what their income is or where they live or their, you know, their life situation? It means, you know, how are we building our buildings so that everyone can afford a place to live, can afford a safe home, and you know, I think that these things, while they're often seen as mundane and you know, local government-y, they're the things that I think make local government really beautiful. They're the things that impact people's lives every single day, and they're the things that people feel impacting their lives every day, and they're the things that people want to be having a part in shaping. I think that's why I love local government so much and the city government so much, is that one person can come to me as a city council member and say, you know, there's a little problem in my neighborhood and I want to have a part in changing it. And I, as a city council member, can help to make that person the leader of that change, which I think is really cool. In addition to that, though, the city government is responsible for really global things too, like fighting climate change. The city of Eau Claire has set a goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. We are creating a new network of local leaders to take on systemic racism in our police departments and our sheriff's departments. So we're taking on some really global things as well, in addition to those daily things that people feel in their everyday lives. And I just love local government for all those reasons, and I'm sure that Kim will have a lot of the similar things to say too. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. And I guess the same question for you, Kim, just at the county board supervisor level. What are your roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, so I would echo some of the same things that Kate said, that we actually have a lot of creativity that we can establish locally in how we want to create budgets. Budgets is, we oversee, as a county elected official, we oversee the budgets from many different departments, including, you know, human services and the sheriff's department, the Aging and Disability Resource Center, our highway department, you know, the courts. There's so many things that we can do within creativity, but we oversee the budgets, and it is definitely, we are heavy into budget season pretty much all year, but right now, especially, the budgets are being, you know, proposed and drafted by our department heads. And so there's an opportunity to, you know, be creative, especially as we are all trying to figure out and find our way and, you know, recover and reimagine what things should look like, you know, with a pandemic, and as Kate said too, you know, with trying to build an equitable and thriving community. We also are a very large service provider, so, you know, within that, we're providing tons of services. As Kate said, you know, people come into the county building for all kinds of things, whether to pay their property taxes, to engage with child support. We have the clerk of courts. When we're not doing virtual meetings, we are in our, you know, county boardroom, literally underneath our jail and underneath our juvenile detention center. So we have the ability to not only be creative and oversee the budget, but also to, obviously, like Kate said, and I echo that, engage with, you know, community. That's the biggest thing. We're not there to represent ourselves, but we're there to represent, you know, community and the constituents that we serve. But yeah, it's a huge service provider, probably one of the largest in our community. So there's all kinds of engagement that people have within the county government and shared services, you know. So I think it's a huge amount of responsibility, and it's also really looking at how do we, as a elected person, as a leader, how do we engage the community? And I think, you know, I have to hail the city a little bit in their ability, or their goal, their participatory budgeting that they have started. And that's something that I'm hopeful that we can also echo as a county. And then what does that process really look like? Are we, you know, setting agendas and then saying, hey, community, give us some input? Or is the community really involved to set the agendas and really speak to how do we want our community to look, and what should those investments look like? So I think there's lots of things that we can do and be creative with as we sort of reimagine. We're at a serious stage in time where, you know, a lot needs to change, and we are all very, very responsible in taking the onus of making that happen. And so it's a large responsibility.
Thank you, Kim. And I'd like to actually have you, Kate, kind of go a little bit further with the participatory budgeting event that did happen here in Eau Claire about a month ago. If you could just talk about how that went and why you believe that's important.
Yeah, so the city of Eau Claire, in our budgeting process, we actually set aside money to really study what is gonna, like, what participatory budgeting really means for our city. We set aside money. The idea in participatory budgeting is that we would have our full city budget, but we would have maybe $100,000, for example, to set aside for our city and the people within our city to decide exactly what that is used for. So that money, you know, neighborhoods or community groups could decide, we want to spend that money on, you know, maybe it's a neighborhood beautification project, maybe it's to plant trees, maybe it's something more revolutionary, like maybe it is pooling that money to invest in like a warming shelter for folks who don't have a place to go at night. And so, you know, maybe it's spending it on a fare-free transit system so that, you know, when you get on the bus, you don't have to pay anything. These are all the sort of things that really the sky is the limit, and that is money that is completely determined by the community. What we have done since setting that money aside is trying to invest in really figuring out what the process is going to look like for that. We obviously, with such an open-ended, beautiful, like civically engaged idea, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's going to suit our city best. And so we only just sort of started that process, and we're still working our way through it, especially with kind of the turmoil of COVID-19 that slowed everything down. So we're really hopeful, and we're really looking forward to that project coming to fruition, and that participatory budgeting process being a part of our budget process, you know, every year for years to come.
All right, thank you, Kate. All right, moving on to kind of the interaction between the city and county level. Kate, for you first, what has your experience been when collaborating with Eau Claire County on issues that span both the city and county authority? And
yeah,
then if you have a couple examples of those issues.
Yeah, I think that the city of Eau Claire and Eau Claire County are a flagship example of collaboration throughout the state. I think, you know, the city and county collaborate a lot. I talk with Kim in particular a lot about different things, and other county board members. But our city and county staff are also, you know, primary allies to each other in fighting some of these shared issues between the county and the city governments. I think the most prominent example of cooperation is our city county health department. A lot of people may not know, but the fact that our health department is shared by the city government and the county government is really unique. That department is funded by both our budgets, and I think we've seen, you know, particularly in light of COVID-19, how strong that model is, and how impactful that cooperation is. But in addition to that, the city and county have so many huge things that we are working together on, both sort of behind the scenes, just kind of in day-to-day work, and also really front and center, really well known to the community. One of the things that we've been working on is the 100% clean energy goals that I mentioned. The city and county set separate goals, but we are sort of working together to achieve those goals. We also had a very collaborative process between the city and the county and other regional communities to take on affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Task Force met for many months, and had representation from the city and the county, as well as people within the community, to develop a long list of like 42 different recommendations, long-term and short-term recommendations to address the affordable housing crisis in Eau Claire. Most recently, the city and the county have been working together on you know, really being introspective about systemic racism in our police department and our county sheriff's department. Those two are separate, which isn't always super well known in the community. There's the county sheriff's department and the city police department, but we recognize that both of these agencies serve the community seamlessly, and it's important to both the city and the county that it's a shared responsibility of addressing systemic racism, and making sure that our agencies are working for the people, for all people in our city. So I'm really, I think, you know, this relationship that the city and the county have in collaboration is really invaluable. It really results in a lot of important progress in our city, and very thankful for it.
All right, thank you, Kate. All right, Kim, how do you assess the working relationship between city and county level governments? And do you have any suggestions for how the two authorities could work together more closely on issues to increase effectiveness?
I think to also echo some of the things that Kate said, I think there's been a lot of actually advocacy in the community that has really spurred the connection and the communication between the two entities. I do think, like Kate said, they do work together and partner together through the city county health department. But then also, I think something that would really be helpful, and I know it's there, is the Shared Services Commission, and that involves representation from the county, from the city, and also from the school board. And I think that's something that really needs to be revitalized and really can do a lot of work together, because so many of the things that affect us, like Kate was talking about, housing issues, our budget issues, we have a community here that 46% of our community members are really living paycheck to paycheck. So how does that affect our students that are trying to go back to school now? Who has access to internet? Do people have the supports that they need? And mixed with a pandemic, for youth, is home safe to be there now all day for school? Do they have the resources that they need and the support that they need to be successful, to do their education and have food, have the ability to do their work? Do they have support? All of these things. And I think sometimes, when you start to speak in sort of a holistic level, when you're in county government, sometimes it's like, well, but that's the education, the school board, but that's city government. And I think we have a real opportunity to boost and bolster the connection and the work that happens between. Sometimes with the separation of the budgets, and I understand that, and I understand why, we don't fully understand the totality of how things are spent in our community and what our investments have been. And so, Kate brought up policing and how, we have a budget for our Eau Claire Police Department, and then we have a budget for our Sheriff's Department, which includes our jail and our correctional officers and, all of the things that go along with that. And then we have grants coming in, and we have a recent high intensity, drug trafficking area designation. So I think sometimes, because things seem so fragmented, that people just assume that that's happening somewhere else. But the totality of what's happening in our community is very much shared, and it's very much connected. And so when we talk about, Eau Claire County, we signed on to the resolution, racism as a public health crisis, and with some specific steps, but also knowing that that wasn't a prescriptive measure. We all need to be working together to figure out, how do we want our community to look? And if we say that we want to have, a thriving, multicultural, multi-ethnic community that's safe, then we need to really be addressing, what does that look like? What does safety aid mean? What are the things that ultimately create safety? And then how are we all working together to ensure that our budgets reflect that? And also, and I don't want to jump ahead of any questions, David, that you might ask, but I'm thinking that, when we look at and really have to start to reckon with and confront the history within our own county and our own community, if we want to look at our budgets and work together, then they have to start to be very reparative. Because we can say that we want to be, perhaps an anti-racist community or anti-racist region, but then if we're not investing in that, and our budgets and our money doesn't show that, how we invest in our community, then I'm not sure that we're really backing what we're saying. So I think there are shared ways, more ways that we can work together. And I'm learning too. I think one of the things that I think is really helpful to me, and I always appreciate, aside from obviously the public engagement and people coming and speaking and emailing and making their voices heard for what they want to see, for the city and the county. But also, you know, we've had people come from the city and really speak at county board meetings. And I know we've had people from the county come and speak at city meetings, and really trying to understand what each other does, and then figure out how can we really work together. We may not agree on everything, and that's okay, but how are we going to work through this? If we can set our common goals for our community, all of us, and what we want to see are outcomes, because if our outcomes are not reflecting that, then we have a lot more work to do. And that's what needs to be reflected in my mind, and I know a lot of others, in what are our outcomes that we want to see in our community. And if they're not happening, then we need to shift and pivot what we're doing, and be really collaborative in how we do that.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, both of you mentioned, you know, working together. That was kind of the basis of what both of you were saying, that collaboration. And in my discussions with different department heads at the county level, so say the sheriff's department, the city county health department, and then maybe DHS, I ran into the experience where people pass the buck to another organization or to another department. We have very fragmented departments in the county, it seems like. And instead of coming together and as a whole taking accountability for what our community looks like, what's happening in our community, it's like we want to pass the excuse to this person for right now because there's an election coming up, or because we don't want to be seen in a certain light. And I think ultimately it just hurts. It hurts the public, and it hurts the people that are most vulnerable. And then once again, what we've been alluding to and what we're kind of building up to here is, you know, that's a situation that's going to prevent us from ever being able to address any systemic racism in this community if we keep on, you know, shifting the blame to another organization or another department to solve these issues. So I appreciate both of you bringing that up, and your value for working together. I kind of wanted to touch on the August 11th elections. I can go with you, Kate, first, or this could be open to both of you, whoever wants to answer first. How do you feel voter engagement was for the partisan primary, and what do you think needs to happen to increase voter turnout in November?
Yeah, so I anecdotally heard from poll workers. Actually, my mom was one of them. I was so proud that you know, anecdotally it sounded like the turnout was really low on Tuesday. But actually, in preparing for this question, I looked it up, and the Leader-Telegram reported that in Eau Claire County, 21% of eligible voters cast their ballot on Tuesday, either through mail-in voting, I know was a large percentage of that, or by going to, you know, drive-through voting early, or on election day. And, you know, 21% does still sound low, right? But I think what really matters is comparing it to previous years like this. So the Leader-Telegram also reported that this is one of the higher local turnouts in recent years for a partisan primary. And so, you know, that number being higher than other years, I think is a really good sign that people are energized to turn out to vote. I think that you know, there's a lot of interest in this election coming up in November, and we just got to make sure that the interest stays high. People understand what truly is at stake, and in addition to that, continuing to make it as easy as possible for people to vote. Here in Eau Claire at the city, we've been working on making small changes to make it easier and safer to vote with COVID-19. You know, in some cases you're literally putting your life in danger to go out and vote, and nobody should be making that choice, a choice between their health and their right to vote. And so we've been working on things like instituting the drive-through voting. We're adding additional ballot drop boxes so that people can drop off their ballot rather than relying on the U.S. Postal Service. And so, you know, I think that we're in good shape for higher voter turnout, but we are definitely not done with the work we're going to be doing all that we can to make sure that everyone has all the resources that they need and the information that they need to cast their ballot. And really, it's as important as ever that we do that. We're asking really what is at stake for Eau Claire in November, and the answer is everything, right? We have seen, we have seen what happens when people don't vote, and this is our opportunity in November to show the country what happens when we do vote. And in particular, here in Wisconsin, we're facing, losing 3 seats in the Senate and 3 seats in the Assembly, which would lose the governor's veto power, which is crucial in making sure that we can rewrite the maps, the district maps in Wisconsin, so that politicians aren't picking their voters, so that it's the other way around. Here in Wisconsin, we have one of the worst gerrymandered maps in the whole country, and to lose that veto power would mean to ensure that the next 10 years we have gerrymandered districts again. I think it's important both for the health of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that these districts are competitive and they're representing truly their district, the people that live there, so that the policies are reflective of the people of Wisconsin. I don't think that that's happening now, and I think that's because of gerrymandering. And so I think, to me, that's one of the biggest things that's up for at stake in November. And everything else sort of trickles down from there in some ways. Of course, we have a really important presidential election as well. So, I think it's really up to all of us to ensure that voter engagement is high, whatever we can do, whether it be phone banking or volunteering as a poll worker. It's actually a paid position. It's not even a volunteer position. Or just as simple as like talking to 3 friends and making sure that your vote is tripled in the election, and making sure that your friends, you're holding your friends accountable to casting their ballot in November as well.
Thank you, Kate. I would pose the same question to you, Kim. Do you need me to repeat it, or you kind of got it?
No, and I think Kate answered that really beautifully, that really everything is at stake. And understanding that voting is critical, and how do we help people alleviate barriers to voting? Sometimes people don't want to vote anymore because they're disgusted with the process, or they feel like maybe their choice is limited, or I've heard people say like it's kind of voting for the lesser of 2 evils. So how do I choose? And I think part of voting, even though sometimes it may not be the person any longer in whatever race it is that was your choice, but how do we be strategic again in looking at, like Kate said, we can see what happens when people don't vote. And 2, there's been a lot of people who have fought and lost their lives for everybody to have the right to vote, and then yet still everybody doesn't have the right to vote, right? So when we're looking at how do we change that, we have a lot of folks right here in Wisconsin that can't vote right now. They're either on probation or on parole, and so they don't have the right to vote. So when we're electing people in positions that can create change, that truly, can develop civic engagement and truly allow for one person, one vote to be able to make a difference, then I think, we have that duty for people that can vote to exercise that right. And so I think, again, Kate said that there's a lot of work being done locally to try to assist people, whether the drive-through voting. I did the drive-through voting in the past, and it was really slick. And I think there's been such a shift in, so many people trying to get absentee ballots. It's been a rocky process. And sometimes, despite the fact that there is a pandemic, that's always been the case, is making it very difficult, making the process difficult for people to vote, and intentionally at times disenfranchising people's right to vote. So I think the more that we know that, I think, we really have to take that vote seriously and exercise our right. And I think, locally, there's a lot of things, like Kate said, that are at stake. You know, our maps, creating fair maps is definitely one of them. And, you know, looking at when people are then elected, you know, we hear that all the time, holding your elected officials accountable, and that includes us as well. So if you're not seeing something that you need to see, absolutely reaching out. It doesn't mean that things are always going to immediately change, but I think, you know, engaging and expecting that your voice is heard is critical. So I think, you know, we have a lot at stake, and gearing up to the November election, really trying to find out what are people's barriers to voting, and then trying to eliminate those. I think that's huge.
Well, thank you both for that. The next question was, I guess at this point, more of a statement, because you both kind of already touched on what I was going to ask you. I was going to talk about the protests that are occurring still after the murder of George Floyd. Obviously, these protests have to do with a lot more than just the murder of George Floyd, but a pattern of systemic racism and abuses by law enforcement. But that's where it manifests itself. But where do these abuses, discriminations, and this systemic racism, where does it begin? And so the question was, you know, would you say that one of the most important things that a person who wants equity and to eradicate systemic racism is one of the most important things they could do is vote? And from your guys' last statement, I could tell that, yes, that is the most important thing you can do right now. So then move over into the next question, which Kate and Kim, you both touched on it also with the gerrymandering piece. Are there any other ways that legislators perpetuate systemic racism? And either of you could take that question first.
I think I can jump in on that. I think one of the things that, you know, legislators can do right now is nothing, and not make have zero will to change anything. I think that is a huge problem. You had kind of touched on earlier, David, about, you know, locally with, we'll say, different departments within the county, maybe not, you know, working necessarily together, or maybe because budgets are involved, things get tense. I think that can happen definitely with legislators too, where, you know, you have the ability to make some change, but I think sometimes people get very uncomfortable, or they just don't want to reconcile with our country's history at all. And so I think, you know, understanding we have a violent history in our country, and so when we elect people and people are in the positions to be able to look at policies that continue to perpetuate racism and continue to, you know, keep marginalized people marginalized, that's definitely not the place for people to be. That's not leadership. And so, you know, I think within our own community, we have, you know, racist policies that had been on the books, and that some still, you know, are perpetuated. So I think, you know, we have a history of racial covenants in housing, and sometimes you'll hear people say, well, but that policy isn't on the books anymore. But if you think about the ripple effect that that's had for people to not be able to build generational wealth within even our own, right here in our community. And also, you know, I think not being comfortable with making change, or really pushing to make change, because people are protecting their political agendas or their political seats, or they're worried about their next race or their next election. So not willing to rock, you know, any votes, or they don't want to go out on any kind of a limb, because it's really then becoming about them. I think that's a huge disservice. And I think, you know, people are here to be able to try to make as much change as possible to create what we're saying we want, which is an equitable community. You know, we want to have, Kate was talking about, you know, regionally, sort of this anti-racist task force. And I think, while things like that are being created, we have this huge responsibility to say, but we can't wait. We have to, each of us, be doing something every single day to be working to change if those are the outcomes and the goals, like we said, that we want to see. I think just really briefly, an interesting, just a quick story, because I know time is of the essence. Each of us at the county board level has a time that we can read moments of reflection, and it happened to be mine, and it was at the end of February this year, and I ended up reading an article. It was from Charles Bow about the Martin Luther King Jr. and how really there was a lot more to him than what white people tend to love. We love the "I love a dream" speech because it feels good, and it is good. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily allow us to confront some of our own, history. And there was talk about, some of the land contracts that were given out by the government in the Midwest, where people could have land and people came out and were educated on how to farm and essentially build generational wealth. And it was really for white people. And so we live in, a rural state. We have many rural communities in our state. And that particular night I read the article, there was also a discussion about wind turbines. So a lot of people from the rural community showed up and we're talking about, gosh, we've had this land in my family for so many years. And this was not intended at all. It was sort of this beautiful moment of education, I think, that occurred for all of us. And it was hard to ignore. People were talking about how land had been owned in their family for many, many years, and they didn't want to see things change, and they were very concerned about a lot of things. And I think there was maybe one indigenous landowner that was there, and the rest were white. And after the meeting, people had to sort of reckon, like, there was talk, like, I didn't know that. I didn't know about, that history pertains possibly to my family. And what does that look like? We always think we're hardworking, and that doesn't mean that people aren't, but that there's been a very white-bodied advantage that we need to start to reckon with. And if legislators and leaders want to say that we want to have safe communities, we want to have healthy communities, then we have to absolutely abolish the violent policies that have been perpetuated, because we won't have safe communities if we don't. And so I think, those are learning moments. We need to know our history. We need to reckon with our history in order to not perpetuate it. So I think that's something that legislators absolutely need to do. And if they're not willing to, as uncomfortable for some as it may be, then they need to not be there.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback off what you said about certain race or systemically racist legislation or things that perpetuate racism. I know a lot of people are like, well, what's one specific? Well, let's talk about truth in sentencing in Wisconsin. 98, the original truth in sentencing bill, and then in 2002, the revision of that bill and the passing. So we talk about, now in 2020, the 20% African-American population in the Eau Claire County Jail and the 1.2% African-American population in Eau Claire County. Well, what is that overrepresentation about? And, the Sheriff's Department will claim that, well, as PO holds, which on a probation hold, you're a ward of the state, but you're staying in the county jail, right? So that is holding you, but you're actually a prisoner of the Department of Corrections. And so this is one of those things where I was talking about one director or one government entity throws their hands up and say, I have no control over this. Well, at the legislative level, we have the control to repeal that act, because that act is what has led us to the point where we have this in the Eau Claire County Jail, 20% African-American overrepresentation of in the jail, but then also at the state level in the Department of Corrections level, the overrepresentation of African-Americans is because at all these contact points with police, at any point in time, implicit bias, explicit bias could have played out. So now you got a record, now you're in the system. Well, eventually you're going to start acting in the manner in which you're being treated. So we talk about, records that go 10 years long. Well, what happened at the beginning of that record? And did racism factor into that, right? So what's supporting all of this happening, all this fighting that's going on at the local level between law enforcement and say communities of color or poor communities or anything like that? Well, it's the legislation like truth in sentencing. And right now our governor has the opportunity to pardon people and to take them off of this extended supervision in these extremely long durations where they're on the street, but they could still be yanked right back into incarceration for rule violations, which a rule violation isn't even a new crime. It is a violation of a rule set forth by you or set forth by your probation officer. So there's a lot of different, complicated issues we can deal with that. But ultimately, if we trace it back to the legislation that is supporting this disproportionate amount of African Americans locked up in incarceration throughout Wisconsin, we can trace that back to truth in sentencing.
I just want to add one quick thought, because I do know that we have a question, it looks like. So I just wanted to add, David, you make a really good point that a lot of legislators and, city and county and state agency workers do, pass the buck, right? And I think the first thing that our legislators and people in government can do is start to take ownership for the systemic racism that is happening and continues to happen. That seems like it should be happening at this point, but it's not. There's a lot of people that look at, our police department or our sheriff's department and say, there's no racism in there, right? They look at it and completely deny it. And I think the first thing that we do is not pass the buck, but actually everybody own that responsibility and say, we're all responsible for this, and it's all up to us to address this. I think second, as there are disproportionately white elected people in our communities, white elected officials need to start listening to people of color and really putting those voices front and center to the solution, and even going farther to say that elected people need to take some ownership over helping people of color be elected themselves to take leadership positions, even if that means stepping aside themselves, right? To have better representation and bring those voices into not only to the table, but leading the meeting, right? And so I think that's, those are some really, I feel foundational starting points that we need to take in order to truly be addressing this perpetuation of a systemic racism in our government.
Great points, Kate. Go ahead, Kim.
No, I was just going to say, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think, looking at the tables that I sit at, or tables that, we sit at, who's making the decisions, and are the decisions that are being made, are we having people who are, most impacted there? Are they leading that? Because we miss that perspective so many times at many of the decision-making tables, and then you just end up perpetuating the same thing that you're trying to abolish, basically. There's a lot of wealth of intelligence and brilliance, not only in our community, but in our state and our nation. And I think, many times that it's people that are most underrepresented, that's the continued perpetuation. We're not having people, represented in our state government, in our local government, in our school boards. And I think that really, really, as Kate said, really needs to change. So how do you mobilize people that if you don't see yourself represented, then we need people to be flipping those seats? And there's also a lot of way that government can also, partner and I think include that. We have different boards and commissions and things, but unless you're really giving people power to make change, if it's just a board that sort of looks good, but they really don't have any authority to make any true policy making change, that's problematic too. So we have to be able to, David, to your point, be changing these racist policies and legislation that has been on the books for way too long, and it's decimated communities, and it's also costing us. Inequities are expensive. I was in a recent NACO conversation, and it's true. Inequities are very, very expensive, because then you spend all this money sort of trying to fill in gaps and create programs, and these inequities shouldn't be there in the first place. That's what we really need to be working toward. And not only, I think it's a huge opportunity that we have. I think many times white people feel like they're going to lose things, but we have the opportunity to actually gain, because we can have a beautiful community that people are thriving in. And we have, multi-ethnic and multicultural business ownership, and people are able to, take care of their families, and kids are able to get educated. There's all of these things. There's so many policies and so many practices that need to be either abolished or reimagined. And I think we have a huge opportunity to do that. But like you said, David, we have a lot of issues, and it gets to the point where is Wisconsin the worst state for Black people or to raise Black youth, or is it Minnesota? And I think we need to get to the point where we're not going to tolerate being sort of the best of the worst anymore. We have to be reimagining how we want to do things.
All right, thank you, Kim. I was just trying to answer some of the questions that we had in the chat. Raisha, if you could go ahead and possibly read these to me. I was just trying to type them to people, but I can answer them out loud also. And then the panelists can also take ones that they may have information on.
I sure can. The first question we started to answer, but there may be some things to add. Two-part question: are there still racist policies in Eau Claire City or County? And the second part is, what are they? Let's start with those two. Are there still racist policies in the Eau Claire City or County, and what are they?
I'd like to start at the level of law enforcement, because that's where I have a lot of experience and where I'm really invested right now. So if we talk about things like deterrent court, treatment court, different deterrent, or what is it called, deferred agreement programs, stuff like that. We have, so once again, we have that 20% population of African Americans in the Eau Claire County Jail, even though we only have a 1.2 to 1.7, if we want to, stretch it to the largest number that we could possibly have, 1.7% population in the county. So what accounts for that overrepresentation of African Americans in the jail? And from the Sheriff's Department, the Sheriff's Department is the county level law enforcement agency that oversees the jail. So the city police department and the Sheriff's Department, when people get locked up in either of those jurisdictions, they're brought to the same jail, right? Well, in some cases you have POs, probation officers, who put their individuals on a hold. So now this hold is, the jurisdiction of this hold is the Department of Corrections, and it's not actually our county or our city police. And so this PO, or probation officer, is the one that is keeping this person remanded in jail. And so that has been the excuse for why we have a 20% African-American population, even with all the holds taken away, we still end up at 8 or 9% African-Americans that are there on new charges with Eau Claire County, which is still an overrepresentation. But so that's where I went into that Act 283, which is the actual act that initiated truth in sentencing back in, it was initiated in 1999, revised in 2002, and has been going ever since. One of the authors of that act was Scott Walker, who served in the legislature for between like 93 and 2001, helped co-author that legislation, and then served 2 terms as our governor, right? So how many years do we have under one individual who has influenced the trajectory of our law enforcement and our Department of Corrections and jails without our entire state, right? The way that our law enforcement is carried out. So all of it comes together and then plays out really at the local level. So that 20% African-American population, well, what we can do in our area is, one, speak out on the individuals that are on PO holds, but then number 2, individuals that are in, a lot of times it's proposed that these African Americans aren't from Eau Claire because they don't have an address in Eau Claire. Well, that goes back to, different landowning, different historical elements that influence who owns land, who has housing, who's been able to purchase houses. in the area. So if you've been a person that moved here, say 3 years ago, and you're renting, you get locked up, you lose your apartment. Well, now you don't have a local address. So now you're considered an outsider, and you're not eligible for a court like treatment court, drug court, veterans court, mental health court, things like that. So it's all the devil's in the details with this, but we have plenty of things just at the law enforcement level that reinforce systemic racism.
A couple other questions, unless Kim or Kate wanted to speak to that one.
I just wanted to add too, I think, sometimes in that sort of passing the hot potato of, okay, but that's not my issue, it's probation's issue, or, perhaps law enforcement maybe at the city level not understanding that that's the data of who's in our jail at the county level. So when we talk about, we need to understand and know sort of what the right hand and what the left hand is doing of law enforcement with our city and with our sheriff's department, we need to have an understanding of what we want public safety to look like in our community, and then have a social contract to create it that we say as community members and as leaders, this is how we want to be policed. And this is our expectation of our community, because people have a lot of authority. Police officers have a lot of authority of decision-making at the point of arrest. District attorneys have a lot of decision-making in how and who they charge. And then probation agents as well have a lot of decision-making power in how they're going to monitor people or not. And so I think, and we as community have a lot of decision-making power too, to say, again, this is why, voting is important. We have elected positions with our sheriff and with our district attorney. And, sometimes people end up in these positions and they run opposed for very, very long periods of time. And so I think that's critical. But yes, we have to reckon with why do we have an overrepresentation of African Americans and Native Americans in our jail, and looking at that, and then requesting, there's work being done where we are requesting on the county level and doing work, like I said, with the National Counties Association Peer Learning Network, to not just reduce racial and ethnic disparities, but abolish racial and ethnic disparities, and requesting, we want data from every, arrest, and we want contacts with the school resource officers. How are you interacting with students? Which students are being disciplined? Which students are being, expelled? Which students are coming up and ending up in our youth justice systems? Which youth in the Department of Human Services? I said I serve on the board of Human Services. Which youth traditionally and currently are in alternate care, are being removed from their homes, and why? And there's a lot of work being done with Human Services to really try to keep youth in their homes where traditionally people would have been taken from their homes, and bringing services and supports to families. So I think we're hearing a lot about how do we change investments and budgets to ensure, if we really want to not have racist policies. Yes, there are still racist policies in Eau Claire, and I hope that we've started to highlight some of them. It's a culture shift that needs to occur in a primarily white community. How do we then shift the budgets to reflect what's needed in the community, and some of the services that David talked about? Who has housing, who doesn't, who's able to access treatment court, what are the barriers? There's barriers to accessing some treatment courts if you are a predatory drug dealer. What does that mean? And who makes the determination of, is it dealing to support your habit, or is it predatory? And I'm not even sure that there's a clear, concise definition that people that are decision making as to who can access treatment court follow. So I think those are things, and when I speak, I'm not trying to speak in like sort of an accusatory way. I'm speaking in a way that these are questions that need to be not only asked, but they need to be answered. And then we can figure out how do we navigate that as a community, and is that what we want it to look like? I kind of touched earlier on this high intensity drug trafficking area, and David's done a lot of work in education, and I know will continue to do so. What does that look like for our community? And historically, you know, the war on drugs decimated Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And so if we are now designated that in our area for Eau Claire County, what does that look like for us? And I don't feel comfortable when somebody says it shouldn't, when I hear authorities say it shouldn't be sort of a replication or extension of the war on drugs. That doesn't make me feel confident at all. And so I think those are policies that we need to really look at as a community, and we need to decide, is that how we want to invest in the health and the wellness in our community? What does that mean?
Thanks, Kim. I will jump to another question that was asked. Does Eau Claire County have the potential to become a sanctuary city?
So I'm going to leave that. Yeah, Kate, take that one. I just wanted to say one thing before you spoke. We have one ICE detention still right now in the Eau Claire County Jail. So I just wanted to add that in there. I also put it in the chat. And then go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, so this issue I've learned is a little complicated. We have heard from immigration advocates in the community that to actually draw attention to our community as a sanctuary city maybe may do more harm than good. We have heard from immigration advocates that, you know, and from our police department, that we operate as a sanctuary city in how we police from the Eau Claire City Police Department. But we, you know, without declaring as a sanctuary city. So it's something that we've talked at length about. We have not taken the steps to do that. I think that all of those things that we can, you know, continue to hear from you know, people on the ground doing the work could always change, though, right? And those things could always change, and it could, you know, we could come to a place where we're finding that we need to be declaring our city as a sanctuary city, that it's imperative to protect the people within our city. I'm told from the police chief that they actually they don't cooperate with ICE to the point where ICE doesn't even call them anymore, which can be a little problematic just in itself, because they're, you know, ICE is coming into our community and the police department doesn't even know that they're here. They don't want to be cooperating with them, I'm told, but you know, so that's sort of what I'm hearing. Like I said, we could come to the place where that's going to be necessary. And I do think that at least at this moment in time, we do have the political will to do that. It's just a matter of what's the most strategic decision in this moment.
Okay. The next question is, could the city of Eau Claire automatically send all registered voters absentee ballots, similar to other districts in other states?
So the city of Eau Claire, cities and counties don't have the power to send absentee ballots to voters. We're not allowed to send absentee ballots to every voter, and actually, even if we were, I would be concerned about if we would financially have the ability to do that. I will say, though, that in light of COVID-19, the Wisconsin Elections Commission has made a decision to send a ballot application to all registered voters, which was a huge decision. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a very important decision, and so that's a great win. I do think that you know, we have more work to do to push for things like that, including in addition to automatic voter registration, just to make sure to continue to break down those barriers to voting.
Thanks again. Next question is, what is the percentage of people of color in Eau Claire County? And I saw that you dropped a resource in the chat, but if you want to share that aloud.
Yeah, so I saw this question and literally just Googled it. The population, there's the U.S. Census has a lot of information online and breaks down, you know, categories of different types of people who are living within our community, and lots of different interesting information. It said there that 90.9% of Eau Claire County is white. And so there's breakdowns of other, races and ethnicities as well.
Great, and it looks like our last question is, what are the main community resources that are currently underfunded?
I regret to say most of them. Local communities in Wisconsin are facing decades of budget shortfalls that are really impacting our ability to serve our community. I really would like to give some time to Kim to talk about the underfunding of human resources, but within the city, our budget continues to fall, even not accounting for inflation. Our people, our staff on the city are continuing to do more with fewer people. And the only exception to that is the police department, frankly. They are also, the police department does consider themselves to be underfunded as well. But they're really the only department in the city that's seen, increases in funding. And so, the way that I see it, the biggest reason for that is continued cuts to shared revenue. Both the money that's coming from the state of Wisconsin to help cities fund their programs, but also restrictions on how local communities can control their local taxes. So, we're not getting the support from the state of Wisconsin, and we're also not empowered to raise our revenue ourselves. And so, we continue to need to do more and don't have a lot to do with. So I think it's challenging local communities to be innovative, but it's really hurting our ability to fund the really important work that can't come cheap, like examining our systemic racism. But I think that Eau Claire, of any community, can definitely do it with the amazing and magical people power that we have here, ready to do the work. So
I would agree and say, we need definitely more services for people, including, housing. Housing is such a huge need for people. We see, people, we talked about our county jail. That's one of the biggest needs that people identify as housing. We have, I think it's a 2% available stock in housing here. So every time there's an opening for a rental, I mean, you can imagine how many people have to vie for an apartment or a place to live. So I think housing supports is huge, and alleviating barriers to people, that even if we do create affordable housing, that it has to be accessible to people. I think, mental health is huge. Mental health and mental wellness. I'm a nurse case manager during my day job, and so I work with people all over the state that are either on Medicaid or they're on SSI. And so just kind of hearing stories of what people are going through and how not only, COVID-19 has affected them, but, we've heard over and over, there's a pandemic within a pandemic with systemic racism. And I think, we need to be able to invest in people. And we have a lot of community programs that, traditionally get parts of the budget. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that's going to pan out as the budgets come forward for this year. And again, it's really looking at the resources that we have. And one of the things that I think gets troublesome for me and others is, how do we then raise revenue when revenues for a county budget may not be there? So do we raise fees? Do we raise fines? Do we raise sort of this extra, quote unquote tax on people that already are struggling to pay? And I think we have to be really mindful and careful in how we do that and how we decide to be able to raise our revenues. One program I'll highlight, locally that I think really could do a lot now and well into the future, and they have done a lot, but is our restorative justice program. We have a restorative justice program here in Eau Claire that works with youth, that works with adults, but there's so many areas that I think really we could be using restorative justice and transformative justice within our community. And there's been sort of this, I would say, maybe not willingness to look at how we could expand that within our community. And they suffered a budget cut, although Human Services did support them through some grant work. But it's things like that that we start to see go by the wayside. Kate mentioned, maybe using some of the participatory budgeting money, maybe for a warming shelter. We don't have really a 24-hour shelter here in Eau Claire and in Eau Claire County, and we do have, obviously winters that people have to deal with, and sometimes extreme heat in the summer. Transportation can be an issue. So we're all seeing, at the county level, there's this, departments are supposed to make a 5% budget decrease. And so making decisions of who does that impact and what services are being provided. And as Kate mentioned, at a state level or from the state level, we're mandated as a county to provide lots of services. Most services are mandated, so we have to provide them. It's just in the way and the form that we provide them that we have some ability to maneuver through and be creative with. But we're always asked to be doing more with seemingly less. And like Kate said, we don't really have the ability to, raise tax to be able to make up for that. So I think, some of those cuts are going to be really requiring a lot of community input to say, how have you experienced the services within the county? What would you like to see different? And then how can we improve and not cut more of what's going to cause more damage within our community of the things that people need: housing, the ability to get to and from work or school, or to be able to have utilities and their basic needs absolutely, for sure, first and foremost met.
I saw in the chat, someone brought up that DHS had, they heard on the radio this morning that they were $1 million. What did they say exactly? That $1 million was unaccounted for. And I actually read the article on that. And that was one of the actual passing the buck situations that I was talking about. In my full-time capacity, I work as a contractor with Comprehensive Community Services, which is agency under DHS. And so I saw in the paper that there's going to be, this morning I saw in the paper that there's going to be a forensic audit of nearly $3 million that is unaccounted for, or shortfall, or whatever that's going on. And there's been some cases where money has been taken fraudulently, and there's a case in court right now related to that. But that's exactly what I was talking about. So DHS is having issues right now. So now the Sheriff's Department, for instance, will claim that, well, there is no issue with the Sheriff's Department. The issue is with DHS. Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. One, we have people, whatever's happening in DHS, we need to get that fixed. And we would get it fixed a lot more quickly if department heads would come together than people passing the buck and saying, no, look, that's the one that's accountable for all these issues. So yeah, that is correct that there is a huge shortfall in DHS, Eau Claire County's DHS, and if that could have the potential of stopping services for a lot of people who really, really need them. So that's something that, we have to consider while extra money is going to policing. Okay, yeah, and sorry that we've kept you guys over time. There's a lot of great questions. I don't want to keep you any longer, so if you want to reach out, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. And just go ahead and shoot me an email if you'd like to get involved. You can also visit ACLU of Wisconsin's Facebook page. And then here in Eau Claire, we have the Rights for All Eau Claire Facebook page. All you have to do is like, and you'll be kept up to date with everything that Rights for All is doing here in Eau Claire. And just keep on staying engaged. If you haven't requested an absentee ballot coming up for the November elections, myvote.wi.gov. You can also get information on the individuals that'll be on the ballot at vote411.org. And let me look for, we have an election protection, or where you can, any kind of problems you have with your absentee ballot, either receiving it, requesting it, or any other voting issues you may have, you can go to 866-OURVOTE.org. That's 866-OURVOTE.org, or call 866-687-8683. And once again, find us on Facebook, and we will relay any of that information that you didn't get written down or any help that you need with anything to do with elections. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Kim, for this extremely informative session. I appreciate it, and I love collaborating with you guys.
Thanks so much for having us tonight, David. It's great to have this conversation. It was really wonderful.
Yes, thank you. And we need more engagement like this, so it's very, very appreciated.
All right.